She's worthless. She can't even afford this dinner. Bethany's voice rang out across the dining room, her words hitting me like a slap across the face. The entire family erupted in laughter, their voices blending into a cruel symphony that made my stomach churn. I sat there at the Thanksgiving table in Phoenix, Arizona, watching my sister bask in the attention she always craved, while I became the punchline of her joke once again. My name is Jennifer Collins. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life being the family disappointment. At least, that's what they all believed. While Bethany received endless praise for her mediocre marketing job and constant financial bailouts from our parents, I had learned to keep my mouth shut and my head down. The modest apartment I rented, the used Honda I drove, and the simple clothes I wore painted a picture of struggle that my family was all too eager to accept. "Jennifer, honey, we know things have been tough for you," my mother said, with that pitying tone I had grown to despise. "Maybe after dinner, your father and I can discuss helping you with some bills." The condescension dripped from her words like honey from a broken jar. Bethany smirked from across the table, clearly delighted that she remained the golden child who could do no wrong. I looked around the table at my family, my parents, my brother Tyler, my Aunt Patricia, and of course Bethany. All of them so certain they knew my story. They saw my quiet demeanor and simple lifestyle, and assumed I was failing at life. What they didn't know was that 5 years earlier, while they were mocking my decision to quit my corporate job, I had begun making investments that would change everything. But I had kept that secret locked away, watching and waiting as they continued to treat me like I was nothing more than a burden. "The thing is," Bethany continued, clearly not done with her performance, "some people just aren't cut out for success. Jennifer's always been the type to make poor decisions." She gestured dramatically toward my plain sweater and jeans. "I mean, look at her. She probably couldn't even pay for gas to get here tonight." The laughter started again, and I felt something shift inside me. For years I had endured their mockery, their assumptions, their complete dismissal of my worth. I had told myself I was taking the high road by not flaunting what I had built in secret. But sitting there, watching Bethany tear me down for sport while my parents smiled approvingly, I realized the high road had only led to more abuse. Perhaps it was time to show them exactly how wrong they had been about everything. The story of my transformation had begun 5 years earlier, though my family would never have recognized it as such. Back then, I was working at Henderson Marketing Group, climbing the corporate ladder and following the path everyone expected me to take. But late at night, after long days of creating campaigns for products I didn't care about, I found myself researching something that genuinely fascinated me: cryptocurrency. While my coworkers spent their evenings watching television or going to bars, I was learning about blockchain technology, studying market patterns, and understanding the revolutionary potential of digital currencies. Bitcoin was still relatively unknown to mainstream investors, trading at just a few $100s per coin. Ethereum was even newer, with most people having never heard of it at all. I started small, investing $500 here and there from my modest salary. My family, when they bothered to ask about my interests at all, would roll their eyes when I mentioned cryptocurrency. "Jennifer's getting into another one of her weird hobbies," Bethany would say with a dismissive wave. "Remember when she thought she was going to become a professional photographer? This is just the latest phase." But it wasn't a phase. While they were convinced I was wasting my time and money, I was methodically building a portfolio that would eventually dwarf their wildest dreams. I researched every investment, studied market trends, and learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when to buy and when to hold. When Bitcoin hit $1,000, I bought more. When it dropped to $800, I bought even more. The real breakthrough came when I discovered several altcoins early in their development. I put $10,000 into a project called Chainlink when it was trading at 20 cents per token. I invested another $15,000 in Solana when nobody had ever heard of it. These weren't lucky guesses. They were calculated investments based on months of research into the technology and the teams behind these projects. My family never understood my decision to leave Henderson Marketing Group and work as a freelance consultant. They saw it as another sign of my inability to commit to success, another example of how I couldn't handle the pressure of a real job. What they didn't know was that my freelance income, while modest, was more than enough to cover my simple lifestyle, while allowing me to reinvest every spare dollar into my growing cryptocurrency portfolio. "She's never going to amount to anything," I overheard my father telling Tyler during last Christmas dinner. "Bethany has her head on straight, but Jennifer just can't seem to find her way." They spoke about me like I wasn't sitting right there, like my feelings didn't matter. I smiled and nodded and continued eating my turkey, all while knowing that my portfolio had crossed the $2 million mark just the week before. Now, sitting at this Thanksgiving table, while Bethany performed her usual routine of tearing me down to build herself up, I realized I was tired of being their scapegoat. Perhaps it was time for them to learn what I had really been doing all these years. The moment that changed everything happened 3 weeks before this Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting in my small apartment, checking my portfolio as I did every morning with my coffee, when I saw numbers that made my hands shake. Bitcoin had reached new all-time highs. Ethereum had surged beyond anything experts had predicted, and my early investments in Chainlink and Solana had increased by over 3,000%. But it was the notification from my newest investment, a cryptocurrency project I had bought into just 6 months earlier, that truly took my breath away. The project had just been acquired by a major tech company for 12 times its market value. Overnight, my modest $50,000 investment had become worth $600,000. When I calculated the total value of my portfolio, the number seemed impossible: $12.3 million. I stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes, refreshing the page again and again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I had become a multimillionaire while living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a car I had bought used 5 years earlier. I had accumulated generational wealth while my family pitied me and treated me like a charity case. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I felt a deep sadness settle over me as I realized what this meant. All those years of Bethany's cruelty, all those moments when my parents had looked at me with disappointment, all those times when Tyler had avoided including me in conversations because he was embarrassed by his unsuccessful sister, none of it had been about my actual worth or potential. It had all been about their assumptions, their need to have someone to look down on, their comfort with casting me as the family failure. But the sadness was quickly replaced by something else: anger. Not the explosive kind that would make me lash out, but the cold, calculated anger that comes from finally understanding exactly how little your family thinks of you. For 5 years, I had been building something extraordinary, while they dismissed me as worthless. For 5 years, I had been proving myself in ways they couldn't even comprehend while they questioned my intelligence and capabilities. The worst part wasn't even the money they had refused to believe I could earn. It was the respect they had refused to give me regardless of my achievements. Bethany made $45,000 a year at her marketing job and acted like she was running a Fortune 500 company. She had never saved more than a few $1,000s in her life, yet she felt qualified to lecture me about financial responsibility. My parents had been subsidizing her lifestyle for years, paying her credit card bills and covering her car payments, yet somehow I was the one they worried about. As I sat there looking at my balance, I made a decision. I would give them one more chance to show me who they really were. And if they chose cruelty over kindness, if they chose to humiliate me instead of simply letting me exist peacefully, then they would finally learn what they had been overlooking all these years. The 3 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving had been a carefully orchestrated performance on my part. I continued my routine of checking my portfolio every morning, but now I was also preparing for what might be my final interaction with my family as they knew me. The numbers kept growing. 12.5 million, then 12.8 million, as the cryptocurrency market continued its unprecedented surge. During those weeks, I received the usual pattern of communication from my family. Bethany called twice, both times to complain about her job and ask if I had heard of any opportunities in my field, though she never bothered to ask what my field actually was. Tyler texted occasionally, usually forwarding memes or asking if I wanted to grab lunch, though he never followed through when I said yes. My parents called once to remind me about Thanksgiving and to subtly suggest I might want to dress up a little for the occasion. "We know you don't have much, sweetheart," my mother had said during that call. "But maybe you could borrow something nice from a friend. Aunt Patricia will be there, and she always asks about you kids." The implication was clear. They were embarrassed by me and wanted me to at least pretend to be successful for the extended family. I spent those weeks watching my family's social media posts with new eyes. Bethany shared photos of her modest apartment like it was a mansion, posted pictures of her $24,000 Honda like it was a luxury vehicle, and constantly humble bragged about her amazing career that barely paid enough to cover her expenses. Tyler shared posts about his weekend activities: dinner at chain restaurants, trips to the local mall, nights at sports bars, all while portraying himself as living his best life. My parents, meanwhile, constantly shared articles about financial responsibility and the importance of hard work, usually accompanied by comments about how some people just don't understand the value of a dollar. The passive-aggressive nature of their posts wasn't lost on me. They wanted the world to know they had raised one successful daughter and one disappointment, and they weren't subtle about which was which. The irony became even more pronounced when I did some research into my family's actual financial situation. Public records showed that my parents had taken out a home equity loan 2 years earlier, likely to cover Bethany's credit card debts and Tyler's student loans. They were leveraging their own retirement security to maintain the illusion that their golden children were successful, while treating me like I was the financial burden. As Thanksgiving approached, I made some strategic decisions. I bought a simple dress from Target. Nothing expensive or flashy, just something presentable. I scheduled a haircut at a budget salon. Nothing that would draw attention but enough to look put together. I wanted to look exactly like what they expected. A struggling woman trying her best with limited resources. The day before Thanksgiving, I did something I had never done before. I took a screenshot of my portfolio balance, $12.2 million, displayed clearly on my phone screen with the bank's official app interface. I stared at that screenshot for a long time, knowing it represented more than just money. It represented 5 years of being right about something, when everyone around me insisted I was wrong. It represented the vindication I had never asked for, but perhaps deserved. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because of anticipation. For years, I had watched Bethany perform her superiority at family gatherings, watched my parents enable her cruelty, watched Tyler silently participate in my marginalization. Tomorrow, they would have the chance to show me who they really were, and if they chose to be cruel, they would finally understand exactly what they had been dismissing all these years. I fell asleep with my phone on the nightstand, that screenshot saved and ready, wondering if I would actually need to use it. Thanksgiving dinner started exactly as I had expected it would. I arrived at my parents' house in Scottsdale wearing my simple Target dress and carrying a store-bought pie. Nothing fancy, just something appropriate for someone they believed couldn't afford homemade. Bethany was already there, of course, holding court in the living room and regaling Aunt Patricia with stories of her latest work triumph. "Oh, Jennifer!" Aunt Patricia exclaimed when she saw me. "How nice to see you, dear. Bethany was just telling me about her promotion to senior marketing associate. Isn't that wonderful?" I smiled and nodded, noticing how Bethany's chest puffed out with pride at the mention of her title that came with a whopping $2,000 annual raise. "What about you, Jennifer?" Aunt Patricia continued with the polite curiosity of someone making conversation. "How's work going for you?" Before I could answer, Bethany jumped in with her trademark laugh. "Oh, Aunt Patricia, Jennifer does some kind of freelance thing, very flexible schedule." The way she said flexible schedule made it sound like code for unemployed. "She's still figuring things out, aren't you, Jen?" I shrugged noncommittally. "I'm doing well. Thanks for asking." Dinner proceeded with the usual family dynamics playing out exactly as they had for years. Bethany dominated the conversation with stories about her job, her apartment, her social life, while everyone listened with rapt attention. Tyler talked about his new position at a local bank, clearly proud of his steady salary and benefits package. My parents beamed with pride at their two successful children, occasionally glancing at me with that familiar mixture of concern and disappointment. "Jennifer's been very quiet tonight," my father observed during the main course. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. Just enjoying listening to everyone's updates." Bethany seized the opening like a shark smelling blood in the water. "You know, I was thinking earlier about how different we all are. I mean, Tyler's got his banking career taking off. I'm climbing the ladder in marketing. And then there's Jennifer with her, whatever it is she does." She laughed, but there was an edge to it that made the table shift uncomfortably. "Bethany," my mother said with mild reproach, though her tone suggested she found the comment more amusing than offensive. "What?" "I'm not being mean. I'm just saying we're all at different places in life. Some of us are building careers and contributing to society, and others are still trying to find their path. There's nothing wrong with that." But her smirk told a different story. The conversation moved on, but I could feel the familiar pattern building. Bethany was working up to one of her performances, the kind where she positioned herself as the successful sister and me as the cautionary tale. I had seen it dozens of times before, and usually I just endured it quietly until I could escape home. But not tonight. Tonight, I found myself paying attention to every word, cataloging every slight, every assumption, every moment of casual cruelty. When Bethany complained about her student loan payments, I noted that they were only $300 a month, less than I typically spent on a single cryptocurrency purchase. When Tyler mentioned his salary increase to $38,000 annually, I calculated that my portfolio had gained more than that in interest over the past month. As we moved into dessert, I could see Bethany gearing up for her grand finale. She had that look in her eyes, that predatory gleam that meant she was about to say something particularly cutting. I straightened in my chair and made sure my phone was easily accessible in my purse. Let her make her move, I thought. Let's see exactly who you really are. The moment arrived with the coffee service, exactly as I had predicted it would. Bethany had been building up to it all evening, dropping little comments here and there, testing the waters and gauging the room's reaction. Now, with everyone relaxed and full from dinner, she was ready to deliver her masterpiece of humiliation. "You know what I love about these family gatherings?" Bethany began, her voice taking on that theatrical quality she used when she wanted to command attention. "It's how we can all be honest with each other. Like, really honest." She looked around the table with mock sincerity. "I mean, we're family. If we can't tell each other the truth, who can?" I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. But this time it was different. This time, I wasn't dreading what was coming. I was ready for it. "The truth is," Bethany continued, her eyes landing on me with laser focus, "some of us have really figured life out, and others are still struggling with the basics, and there's no shame in that. I mean, look at Jennifer." She gestured toward me like I was an exhibit in a museum. "She's 29 years old and still can't figure out how to build a real career or contribute to society in any meaningful way." The table went quiet. Aunt Patricia looked uncomfortable. Tyler stared at his coffee cup. My parents exchanged glances but didn't intervene. They never did when Bethany went on these tirades. "I've been thinking about it all evening," Bethany pressed on, clearly energized by the attention. "Jennifer shows up here in clothes that probably came from a thrift store, driving that ancient car, living in that tiny apartment. She doesn't contribute to conversations about careers or success because she literally has nothing to contribute. She's like a cautionary tale." She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. I could see she wasn't done yet. "I mean, let's be completely honest here. She's worthless. She can't even afford this dinner." The words hung in the air like poison gas. If Mom and Dad hadn't cooked tonight, Jennifer would be eating ramen noodles alone in her apartment because she literally cannot afford to feed herself properly. The laughter started immediately. Tyler chuckled nervously. Aunt Patricia gave an uncomfortable giggle. My parents tried to look disapproving, but couldn't hide their amusement. Bethany beamed with satisfaction, clearly delighted with her performance. "Bethany, that's enough," my mother said half-heartedly, but she was still smiling. "What? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just pointing out reality. Some people are built for success and others—" She gestured vaguely in my direction. "Others are built for dependency. There's nothing wrong with that. Society needs people at every level. Jennifer's just never going to be the type of person who builds wealth or achieves anything significant. And that's okay." The laughter continued, and I felt that familiar burning in my chest that came from being humiliated by people who claimed to love me. But this time, instead of wanting to disappear, I felt something else entirely. A cold, clean rage that sharpened my focus and steadied my hands. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The movement was so casual that no one paid attention to it at first. I opened my banking app, waited for it to load completely, and then did something I had been planning for weeks but had hoped I wouldn't need to do. I paused for exactly 30 seconds, letting Bethany's words fully sink in for everyone at the table. Then I unlocked my phone screen, placed it face up on the white tablecloth, and slid it slowly across the table until it came to rest directly in front of my sister. The laughter died instantly. $12,217,436. The number glowed on my phone screen in the banking app's crisp digital font, impossible to fake and unmistakably real. The Chase Bank logo at the top of the screen confirmed its authenticity, and the timestamp showed it was current as of today. Silence stretched across the dining room like a physical force. Bethany stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The color drained from her face so completely that for a moment I wondered if she might actually faint. Aunt Patricia leaned forward in her chair, squinting at the phone as if she couldn't trust her eyes. Tyler's coffee cup was frozen halfway to his lips, his expression one of complete bewilderment. My parents sat perfectly still, their gazes moving from the phone to my face and back again, processing what they were seeing. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of my father's old clock on the mantelpiece, counting off the seconds in what felt like the longest minute of my life. This can't be real," Bethany finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where did you get this money?" The question came out strangled, desperate, as if she could somehow will the numbers to be fake if she just demanded an explanation loudly enough. I leaned back in my chair, feeling calmer than I had in years. "I got it the same way anyone gets money, Bethany. I earned it." My voice was steady and quiet, but it carried clearly across the silent room. "I invested in cryptocurrency starting 5 years ago. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Chainlink, Solana, and about 20 other projects that you've probably never heard of." "That's impossible," Tyler said, finally finding his voice. "You can't just... Cryptocurrency isn't... People don't actually make millions from that stuff." He looked to our parents as if they could somehow confirm that this was all an elaborate joke. I reached across the table and picked up my phone, checking the balance one more time before turning the screen toward the rest of the table. "Actually, quite a few people have made millions from cryptocurrency. You just have to know what you're looking at and be willing to take calculated risks." "I started small," I continued, watching their faces as the reality continued to sink in. $500 here, 1,000 there. While you were all laughing at my weird hobby, I was building a portfolio that's now worth more than all of your annual salaries combined. For the next 5 years. Bethany's hands were shaking now. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. Your clothes." She gestured helplessly at my simple dress. "My apartment costs $800 a month and meets all my needs. My car is reliable and paid off. My clothes are comfortable and functional." I paused, letting that sink in. I don't need to impress anyone or prove anything through my possessions. Apparently that was a good strategy, since it let me reinvest every spare dollar while you were all busy judging my lifestyle choices. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat awkwardly. Jennifer, dear, I had no idea you were doing so well for yourself. That's really quite impressive. Thank you, Aunt Patricia. It's been an interesting journey. I looked directly at Bethany, who seemed to be struggling to form words. You mentioned earlier that some people are built for success, and others are built for dependency. I've been thinking about that. My parents finally found their voices. Jennifer, why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, her tone completely different from the pitying condescension she had used earlier in the evening. Would you have believed me if I had? I asked simply. Or would you have assumed I was lying or exaggerating or somehow confused about my own bank balance? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. Bethany suddenly stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This doesn't change anything, she said, her voice rising with desperation. Money doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't erase the fact that you've been avoiding real responsibility your entire adult life. I nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Bethany. Money doesn't make me a better person, but it does make me financially independent, which means I never have to sit through another dinner where someone calls me worthless for entertainment. Bethany's reputation as the family success story crumbled within weeks when extended family members learned about the Thanksgiving incident, with cousins and aunts sharing stories of how she had publicly humiliated her millionaire sister while living off their parents' financial support. The social embarrassment was compounded when people realized Bethany had been bragging about her $45,000 salary and modest apartment while mocking a sister worth $12 million, making her appear both foolish and cruel to everyone who had witnessed years of her condescending behavior. My parents faced their own reckoning when other family members questioned how they had raised one daughter to be so spiteful toward another, especially when their disappointment had achieved more financial success than the rest of the family combined, forcing them to confront their own poor judgment and favoritism in ways that damaged their reputation as wise, fair parents. The family dynamic never recovered from that Thanksgiving revelation, as I maintained polite but distant relationships with people who had shown me their true character through years of casual cruelty and dismissal. Bethany's attempts to rebuild bridges were met with my simple observation that someone who would publicly call their sister worthless for entertainment was probably not someone I needed in my life, regardless of apologies or changed circumstances. I moved to San Diego 6 months later, buying a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, and found peace in surrounding myself with people who valued character over appearances and kindness over performance. As I watched the sunset from my new deck, I reflected on how Bethany's cruelty had ultimately given me the greatest gift of all: the clarity to see that some people's opinion of my worth said far more about them than it ever did about me.